And there are therapists out there that just say, I am not comfortable with having a therapeutic relationship with somebody through a computer screen. And I get that. But I would say, I bet you're not comfortable with your first few clients in your office either.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to private practice entrepreneur Clay Cockrell. Clay is a true innovator. He started walk and talk therapy in his Manhattan therapy practice when no one else was doing it. He's also the founder of maritaltherapy.com, where he provides online couples therapy, and onlinecounseling.com, a directory for therapists providing online therapy. Listen as Clay gets real about the scary moments and the rewards of going out on a limb. Welcome, Clay. Thank you so much for being here.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey, which is a very interesting one. So I really see you as an innovator in a bunch of different ways, and you have a few different things going on now. You've got onlinecounseling.com and maritalcounseling.com, and then you have your therapy practice specializing in walking and talking therapy. So I want to start there with your therapy practice. Okay. So you've got walk and talk therapy in your private practice in Manhattan. Can you explain that to any of the therapists who might not be familiar with what that means?
Of course. It's essentially what you would think a counseling session would be, except that instead of meeting in an office and having either a couch or two chairs, we meet at Columbus Circle near Central Park, and we walk in the park for the session. And I have found it to be incredibly therapeutic. It's effective. I think initially it came as a need for a client that was having a hard time getting to me. And all good things come from my wife. And she was the one that came up with the idea. And my knee-jerk reaction and probably a little mansplaining was trying to explain why that you just can't do that. And the more I tried, the more I couldn't. And so I said, maybe there's something here. And there really wasn't anyone at the time that did this kind of therapy. And so I started doing it, got a lot of media coverage for it, and became known as the walking therapist. And people came to me because I did something a little different. And I think that I attracted people who thought outside the box, entrepreneurs, creatives. There's a lot of actors and directors and artists here in New York. And so it just was at the right time and the right idea, and it really took off.
Oh, so cool. And was it scary to go out on a limb?
Absolutely, because yeah. I didn't want to look like the nut job.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things. I didn't want to look like the nut job to the general public, but I didn't want to look like this incompetent, unknowing person to my peers. These unknown, the therapy world. I don't know a lot of therapists, but I know that there is, this general feeling, a community out there, and that I would be chastised by that community because I wasn't doing it the quote right way. So I really. There was a lot of fear about that. I didn't want to be seen as crazy or, what's the right word? Taking advantage of clients or, there's a lot of people out there that are maybe not reputable. And I didn't want to lose my reputation. And not that I really had one. So you sit there and think, it's like, nobody knows who I am. But there was all that fear of what are people going to say, so that was hard.
That's really interesting when you were just saying who are these people who I'm thinking are going to be critical? I mean, for one thing, I think anytime you try something different, even if it's really well thought out, someone will be critical. But, and that's kind of usually a good sign if somebody's critical because it means you're doing something unique. But also, it's so interesting you said, like, who are these people who are going to be critical? Like, sometimes we don't need actual naysayers because the voices come up in our head.
Exactly. Exactly. And in there have been instances where those voices became real and people would contact me out of the blue, people who I did not know, who just said that I was an awful person for doing this. This isn't real therapy. And so that fear of somebody's going to call me out, once I actually had that, it had no impact at all, because I kept thinking, I don't know this person. I don't care what they think. Why am I concerned about this person? And more recently, I have a small subset of people that I work with who are the uber wealthy, the 1% of the 1%. And, how do you deal with money and entitlement, and how do you raise children in a money environment? That, I've had some media attention and people out of the blue, just strangers that I have never heard of, or just calling me horrible names, talking about me on talk shows. Well, this is the worst nightmare. Strangers are talking about me, and you know what? It's not that bad.
So the fear of that was worse than when it actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess because by then I'm imagining you're grounded in both of these cases, like you're grounded in the actual work you're doing with people and seeing the impact. And
Yes.
So what someone who doesn't actually have any idea what's going on says doesn't really matter.
Right. Because now I believe in it. At the beginning, I think that I was vulnerable emotionally, because I think my own belief in it was somewhat fragile. I sort of believed in it. I sort of believed in myself. But now I do. And, hit me with your best shot. I know.
And you're also on the cutting edge of online therapy. So I'm wondering, I just see that it's interesting how you're just really outside of the box in these different ways. What was it that started drawing you to online therapy?
I like to travel. I love to travel, and I wanted to see the world. And when I used to work for corporate America, I would get my 2 to 3 week vacation that I could go, and I still got a paycheck. But when you're in private practice, if you're not seeing clients, you're not making money. And I wanted to travel more. I wanted to have extensive visits to countries. And I started thinking, maybe this is a way that I can work and take my clients with me. And it was my own need. I wanted to be able to do that. And so the idea came, let's try to do some online counseling and grow that. And so I started the maritalcounseling.com and started working with couples online. And it really was a situation where a lot of these couples, this was the only way that they were going to be able to receive care. That they either lived apart, or they were in long distance relationships, or military people who were deployed, having, can you imagine the difficulty in maintaining a relationship, over thousands of miles, and the stress of combat and all of that. So that I started working with these groups and fell in love with the modality, fell in love with the connection, and it really took off from there. And I just loved it. But really, it was selfishly, I wanted to be able to travel, and this was the only way I could figure it out.
And what are some of the places that you've conducted therapy from?
Sandy and I went to Rome for 6 weeks. And it was glorious. We would get up in the morning and go see sights, and then I would come back like 4:00, where at that time a lot of my clients were in the U.S., and I would see clients up until 11:00 at night, Rome time, which was, I think, like 5:00 here in the U.S., or 6. And then we would go out, and the restaurants were still open, in Rome, and it was, I loved it. And we spent a month in London a couple of years ago. I spent a couple of weeks in Aruba. There was challenges in Aruba. It was because of the internet was not as easily, the connection was not as good. So we've got the travel bug.
And you haven't had to decide between traveling or working. Like I'm imagining sometimes you probably take time off, but you haven't had to decide to make your trips as short as you need your vacations to be.
Absolutely. Because and we will go away and I'll shut down for a week and sit on the beach. But so many therapists that I know, this is not really a job that we need a vacation from. We're passionate about it. I think it's a job that we certainly should take a vacation from just to recharge. But I like to travel and work, and certainly it's helpful to have that income coming in to support my little Airbnb apartment while I'm in Rome or wherever.
Absolutely. So then with online therapy, again, you were kind of out on a limb, figuring out how to make this work. And then how did it become clear to you? Was there a moment when it became clear that you wanted to create a directory for online counseling?
Yes. It was, I had a client that was seeing a couple, and I needed to refer the husband out. He had some sexual trauma. He needed a specialist. He was in a remote area. There were no therapists near him, and he liked the connection online. And so I started looking for a place to where it's like a Psychology Today for online therapy. There's got to be a directory out there. And there really wasn't. And I went, okay, maybe we need to make one. So I met with Joe Sanok and say, hey, I got this idea, I got this domain name, I think maybe this, and he was completely supportive, pointed me in the direction of some web designers. And over the course of the last year or so, we've really knocked this thing out, created something that's pretty vibrant. We've got over 200 therapists around the world now. And what it became was an advocacy site, to bring therapists and let them know this is a viable way of having a practice, but also an education site. And I've been very open that when I started marital counseling online, I did everything wrong. I just out of ignorance and hubris, I just started I met with people on Skype, which was, not compliant with HIPAA. I met with people in states that I was not licensed in, just because, hey, I got a license in New York. Why wouldn't I be able to, And so I did everything wrong. And as I started pulling this directory together and wanting to put an education element to it, I started learning myself and I went, oh, I didn't do that right. and then there was a lot of resistance on my part too, going, well, why? Why shouldn't I use Skype? Nobody's going to care if I have a business associate agreement. Skype is encrypted, and I really started pushing against it. And I'm licensed in New York. Nobody's going to really care if I see somebody from Michigan. Certainly my clients don't care. And so I started doing a lot of pushback, and I see other therapists now doing that too. And so anyway, I just started putting a lot of material together on why these regulations are there. We may not agree with them, but we also want to be compliant with and protect our own license and protect our clients. And there is more than enough clients to go around for people who are looking to go into the online counseling world. So it became an educational site. And so now with learning about SEO and Facebook ads and all this other stuff, we are ranking on the first page of Google, so that when somebody is sitting in a hotel room and say, I really need to find a therapist, I'm on the road all the time, or maybe I live in North Dakota and I don't have anybody near me, they can go on there and put in, just like Psychology Today, all the different filters. I want to see a man, I want to see a woman, I want to see somebody who specializes in anxiety or depression, and it will spit out names of people that we have vetted, so they're licensed, they're accredited, and they will be able to meet with you online in a safe way.
I'm thinking too, I bet there are so many therapists who are kind of dabbling in online counseling and probably making mistakes and sort of not quite taking the steps to feel really grounded in it. And so I'm thinking this is a great way for people to then embrace what they're doing and maybe even do more of it, but do it in a way where they're feeling grounded and supported and clear that they're doing it right.
Right. Yeah. We put a page on there called the Therapist Toolbox, and it's all sorts of resources and guidance for the psychotherapist who wants to begin doing this, on how to do it correctly, how to set yourself up, on what platforms are HIPAA compliant, and how do you find out about your license for your particular state. or your client's state, because there are some states out there that don't have regulation yet. So I think somebody said Pennsylvania was one of them, but I haven't checked recently. But if they were to contact you from a state that didn't have any regulations, it's okay to see them. And then what people don't think about sometimes is that internationally, there are very few regulations to see anyone outside the United States. So there is, I keep coming back to the statistic that there's one mental health professional for every 400,000 people in India. And they have a massive mental health crisis. And there's just not enough people. And there are no regulations. English is one of their two official languages. And they have a growing economy so that they can support mental health services. There's still some stigma about getting mental health care. But that's just one country. You start looking at China, Australia, expats living around the world. There's a massive need out there outside the United States. And I think it takes a special kind of arrogance. If someone in need came to me and said, I want to hire you, you have a specialty that will meet my needs. And I say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that because you're not showing up the way I want you to show up. You need to come to my office here in New York. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to, when the technology is there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is something unethical about that.
Do you think that that things are going to be changing with online counseling? Do you think the regulations are going to be changing?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think that there is a movement out there to take away the state licensure, or I forget the phrase that they're using, but national licensure for psychotherapists, that they could work online. I think that there's a lot of states that are going to fight that just because they're incentivized monetarily to keep those licenses in state. But yeah, I think that every other industry in the world has been upended by technology. Who are we to think that ours is going to be different?
Yeah, it makes me think of like the Electoral College. It's like something that some of these regulations were created in a different time. Well, I mean, not that the Electoral College was ever created for a particularly good reason, but but with these regulations in particular, it's really not serving people. And I can see how maybe there was a time when it was, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. There had to be a reason behind some of this stuff. But I think that things have changed and that this is just a new tool. Face-to-face, in-office counseling is never going to go away. And there are therapists out there that just say, I am not comfortable with having a therapeutic relationship with somebody through a computer screen. And I get that. I get that. But I would say, I bet you were not comfortable with your first few clients in your office either.
That is so true. That's such a good point.
We have to stretch ourselves. I remember sitting in my office. I was given an office way too early. I don't know how I got this job, but I was doing adolescent substance abuse in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. And this kid comes in and he starts talking about all his problems. And it was on the tip of my tongue. I didn't say it, but it was on the tip of my tongue. You should go see somebody.
Yeah.
Before realizing I was with somebody. That's why he was there.
Yeah, there's some people who are not comfortable because really that in-person relationship is going to be best for them. And then there are some people who aren't comfortable because they haven't tried it yet. I think that's such a good point.
And I had my own prejudices with different kinds of online counseling. As I started doing my podcast and talking to different therapists and reading a lot about it, there was this concept of email therapy and text-based therapy. And everything within me just boiled up and said, that's not real therapy. It's just not. And then I talked to this woman who has the leading online counseling practice in Ireland. And she said, let me tell you this story about this kid that was in college. And he communicated and wanted to have sessions with me through text. And that was the only way he was willing. He was a young kid. He didn't want it. It was all anonymous. And then he graduated into, okay, we're going to email back and forth. And there is a whole science and training on how to read, how to write, how to structure your time with email and text-based therapy. And then it got to the point where they could talk on the phone. And he got more and more comfortable with the process. And then they could connect on a platform like Skype, but with their cameras off. And then her camera would come on in one of the sessions, and he would get to know her face. And then it's just this gradual progression in his comfort level for someone who would not have obtained services in any other way. So I'm challenged myself of, I can't tell somebody how best, if they're not going to get any services, it's best to start at a certain level and then maybe go up.
Oh, I love that story. That makes so much sense. Clay, have there ever been, in any of your businesses, have there ever been low or scary moments? Does any kind of low or scary moment come to mind?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So many times where I just thought, I'm not going to be able to make rent next month. And understand, too, that I started with Google AdWords when I got the Walk and Talk domain name and started my little practice. And some producer from Good Morning America found me. No, it was at the Wall Street Journal. And she thought it was just the coolest idea and wanted to do an article on me. I'm like, yeah, sure. And then, so that came out. And then this producer from Good Morning America saw that article and produced a whole segment with me. I'm walking through the park with Juju Chang and cameras and the whole thing, right? So I invested heavily, knowing that this was going to go out in 3 or 4 days. I invested heavily on an answering service, dedicated all these phone banks, thinking I'm going to get all these calls, and updated the website, did all that stuff. And I did not get one call from Good Morning America or the Wall Street Journal or anything. And, you think about it, who picks their therapist from morning television? Nobody does that. So there were times where I just misread things and invested improperly. And so that's definitely a big fail. I can go through all sorts of fails. There was the time, here's a big one. I love telling this story because my wife was appalled. When we were developing the online counseling directory, we thought we were going to be ready for last winter at the Psychotherapy Networker Symposium in Washington, D.C., which is a major, major conference. And so I booked a vendor booth. We were right next to Rutledge Books and therapy sites and, in this vendor hall. And so I'd never been a vendor before. We invested in these banners and postcards and all sorts of material. And we're getting set up with our little booth, right? And of course, the therapists and counselors are in symposiums and talks all day long, and they're getting training. And I found out that just before the vendor hall was opened, the talk that they were giving was the dangers of online counseling.
So perfect.
So they throw open the doors of the vendor hall, and there's Clay and Sandy with their little postcards, onlinecounseling.com.
You're like, hi, guys.
But the great thing is that they had all the right questions then, and we knew enough to have all the right answers. So in the end, it turned out to be, not a huge success, but it was a success because we met a lot of cool people.
Yeah, and now you're going to have to be one of the people giving the talk next time. So how do you balance your roles of CEO and clinician in your businesses?
It's hard. Mm-hmm. I think that having that skill of compartmentalization and being in the moment. When I sit down or when I meet with a client in the park and we're going to be walking, I have to be in that moment. This is the hat that I'm wearing. This is Clay, the therapist. Mm-hmm. And then when I sit down, and this is also dedicating my time of working on websites or working on Facebook or working on networking. This is the business guy that has to show up. And now I'm wearing that hat. And yeah, my brain is the squirrel brain. It wants to go chase the leaf and whatever. And I think that it's just important to know that when I get defocused like that, I just have to pull myself back and go, not now. I'll get to that when I get to that. But right now, this is this moment. So meditation can be very helpful with that in helping to control the mind, and intention, certainly. And a lot of of patience with myself,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that when it's okay, and sometimes great ideas come when I'm out of whack, or I'm not thinking correctly in the right moment. But just go, okay, get back on focus. One foot in front of the other, that type of thing.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm really squirrely, I'll have a piece of paper next to me so that I can jot down whatever my squirrel brain is trying to get me to think about, and then get back to
Yes,
what I'm supposed to be doing.
absolutely. That's helpful. That's really helpful because I do that because that relaxes me. I'm not going to forget.
Yes.
I'm back to that paper, and hopefully I'll remember what that little squiggly line meant.
You've got a lot going on. How many therapy sessions do you like to have in maybe an average week?
I try to limit it to 25, about 5 a day. And that is hard sometimes. And then sometimes I don't get that many.
That's a lot for how much other stuff you have going on too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why I've really got to be on top of my my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like I schedule a client from 2 to 3, I'm going to schedule my Facebook ads from 3 to 4, and that's a dedicated time. But yeah, there are days that I say I need the whole day for working on blogging or networking, or the website needs to be cleaned up, or whatever. Certainly podcasting takes a lot of time, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a challenge, and I don't always get it. And that's where I try not to beat myself up of, tomorrow's a new day, another chance to get it right.
Yes. Yes. And kind of focusing on, well, what did I accomplish, instead of just looking at those things that you didn't get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important. What did I get to?
And what do you charge in your therapy practice right now?
$200 per session.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Manhattan, and that's middle to low on the market. And a lot of people will say, okay, well, you're in Manhattan, but you've also got people in Buffalo and other parts of New York, and people, outside the United States that, that might be a steep price. Do you charge something different for online sessions? And I don't. And I think that that's important, that we are in general underpriced as therapists for the value that we bring, and that we need to educate our communities and society that this is a valuable service and that it is worth a certain price. And how you get that is not, oh, since you don't have to come to me, I'm going to give you a discount. No, that the service has not changed. In fact, I try to argue back. It's like, why wouldn't I charge more for online counseling? Because they don't have to pay for parking, and they can stay in their office, or they can Skype from their hotel room, or not Skype, obviously, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, and the people that, I never thought about that.
Are you getting pushback from colleagues when when you were just describing what people sometimes say? Is that colleagues, or is that other people? When people say, well, why don't you charge less for online counseling?
Colleagues.
Okay.
I have never, and we as therapists, we overthink so much.
Yep, we have some issues.
Yeah, really do. I'm going, there's not another profession out there that overthinks things like we do. Which, stands to reason. We're in the mental field. But I have, in 6-7 years of working online, I have never had one person say, you should charge cheaper because I'm going to, I'm not going to have to come to your office, or I wouldn't even know how you would phrase that, but I've never had anybody say that. It's just always come from other psychotherapists. They're like, maybe I should charge a little. What? No.
Yeah. And I think maybe where that comes from, at least for some people, is some therapists have this problem of kind of adding up, well, how much do I need to be able to support myself? And then kind of design their practice to hit that number. And then we know if you design your practice to hit that bare minimum number, you're not going to get higher than that. You're probably not going to hit that, because things always come up. And so, yeah, I want to help people stop doing that. Stop thinking like, well, what's the bare minimum I would need to hit my rent and then pay my living expenses? And I really want people to start thinking like you do, like, well, what really makes sense for me and for my business and for my family?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and the value of what I do. I know that the average divorce in the U.S. costs between $30,000 and $50,000, and I'm sure that that's an old number. But I believe that working through a process of couples counseling, that can, in a lot of cases, be avoided. So I'm going to charge $100 an hour or $75 an hour to avoid you losing $50,000. No, I have a lot of value in what I do. Plus, that's just monetary. What about happiness and joy and contentment and a vibrant relationship? How do you put a price on that?
Well, on that note, actually, would you join me for a listener question?
Absolutely.
Listener question. Charles wrote in, I work in a slowly growing private practice in a small town in Oregon. I really want to dispense with the insurance panels. The paperwork and rules are onerous and variable, and even with the help of a biller, they pay half of what I charge. And when they do pay it, it often takes several months to get paid. But I can't seem to get many cash-paying clients. Is it realistic to think I can create a cash-based practice in a relatively small town of under 40,000? And so then I followed up with Charles to ask just a couple more things and to find out how much he wants to make and whether there is an affluent community in this town. And there is an affluent community, and his income goal is $72K a year net. And he might be open. So I had a lot of questions he had to answer. He might be open to working remotely, but he doesn't relish the idea. So
relish the idea.
Yeah.
I can't get that. Why would you not relish the idea? I'm being silly. There are people that, that's not for them. So he wants to make 72,000. He lives in a town of 40,000.
Well, I do think we want to maybe, because he said, I don't relish it. We talked about this earlier, how, well, it might be because you haven't tried it. You haven't looked into it and gotten educated about it. So that's one thing I would want to kind of push him on, is exploring that option.
Yeah, I certainly would, because almost to a person. Because I on my podcast, I interview people that are like lawyers and technology people on HIPAA compliance, but also, and marketing people, but also other therapists that have been doing this. And almost to a person, they each said the only reason I got into online counseling is because my clients asked for it. They were either going to be going away for business, or a kid was going to be going away to college. They were having too hard of a time getting there with babysitting and all this other stuff, that they were pushing for this service. So our clients are wanting this. And I think that we have to evaluate if this is coming from them, are we in a good place to say no? And as you're saying, I also think that it's going to be difficult the first few times. Any kind of change is going to be difficult. So expect that. It's going to be weird. Practice with your friends. Get your wife on a different computer and to practice the lighting issues and the camera and how do I connect and how do I make eye contact and yet not look like I'm looking off to the side of the camera. How do you figure all that out? And those are just logistic stuff. But when you start saying, I want to make a certain income and I may be in an area where it's not going to support that, then you need to increase your target audience, and not just to the state of Oregon. Pull out to expats living in Saudi Arabia and Kenya, and I've got a couple living in Kazakhstan, and there are people that want your services, that are willing to pay for your services, that don't think twice about dropping $200 for a session around the world. So you sometimes have to go to them. The other thing that I've never taken insurance. I wouldn't know how to fill out an insurance form. So I've never done that. But one of the most successful things I did as an entrepreneur and a business person was to join BNI, which is Business Networking International. And they are a networking group that they're all over the world. And we meet once a week, way early in the morning for breakfast. And there's one person per profession, one mover, one lawyer, one real estate person, one tax attorney. So that you block out your competition and you get to know other people, other small business owners, leaders in your community, and if you don't have a BNI chapter, contact BNI and start one, because business is all about networking and who knows you and who's going to trust you. And when you have breakfast with a person once a week, you're going to get to know them. And that has been successful. So even in a small town, which 40,000 is not super small, I grew up in a town that had 800 people in it. So,
so small.
Yeah, I know small.
Yeah. I feel like he really scored that I asked you this question. I think it's not that small of a town. I think he also could look at working on his website. I didn't get a chance to look at his he didn't send me his website, but that would be in that kind of a situation, in that kind of a town. It would be a place where search engine optimization could help him a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, unlike in San Francisco where, unless you've got a really particular niche, you're not going to get to the front page of Google here. Mm-hmm. But he really could. And then I would also think, take all that time you're spending on paperwork and get off of the panels and maybe, at your pace, one by one, and then use all that time and energy to do some different marketing. Look at public speaking in front of your right fit clients. Look at
absolutely
BNI, like Clay talked about, and just take that energy doing something that you're really not enjoying and put it into getting in front of your clients.
Public speaking is incredibly helpful because you become known within your community as the guy to go to for adolescent anger issues or whatever. Blogging, all the stuff that we know. Get to know your doctors. They're the ones that are referring people. Get to know the pastors and religious leaders because they're the ones that are referring people. It's all those basics in getting your name out, which some people like that and some people don't, but we got to do it.
Yeah, and we can all find something that we at least don't hate that will get our name out. Yeah. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Clay. That was super helpful. So where can people find you and throw compliments at you?
You can contact me. The best is through my email, which is clay@onlinecounseling.com.
Great. And I'm going to have your businesses and everything we talked about in the show notes too.
Okay. And we're running a special. Can I tell about the special?
Yes, please.
So we started out at a monthly fee of $24.95 for licensed therapists to put their profile up, just like Psychology Today. And now we have a deal to where if you buy a year up front, if you pay for a year, that takes that price down to $12.47 a month, which is, that's less than 50 cents a day, for the opportunity to get in front of people who are looking for online therapists. So check us out.
Excellent. Definitely. Thank you so much, Clay. It's been such a pleasure.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Here's an idea to try.
Idea to try.
Networking is important. A lot of times we can get into a rut of networking with just other therapists. Now, it's possible to fill your whole therapy practice just by networking with therapists and having a decent website. But you're going to fill your therapy practice a lot faster and keep it full a lot more successfully if you also network with people outside of our profession. So an idea to try is to think of one profession that people who are your right fit clients tend to hire, and now track down somebody in that profession who you really respect. And it might take you a while to find the person. Let's say you decide that person is going to be an acupuncturist. Ask your friends, ask your colleagues who the best acupuncturist that they know is, and then contact that person and start building a relationship with them. Don't start out by asking for clients. Just start a relationship where you learn about them, you learn about how they work, and you see if they might be a good referral partner for you. Over time, you want to have a nice, ample referral network with perhaps dozens of people in it. But the best way to build that network is just one person at a time. So my idea to try is find one person outside the therapy profession and get started. Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. If you're wondering how I can help you build your therapy practice, check out the Superpower Method for Therapists program at coachingwithannie.com. It's my 14-week program that takes you through a step-by-step process to build your practice. I'm editing out this part where I pause and think, ooh, what do I want to ask you next?